Michael Cimino, good evening.
Good evening.
Why did you want to become a film director?
I have no idea.
None whatsoever.
I began in painting and architecture, and I think I principally got involved with commercial filmmaking because of the models.
The models?
Yeah, the girls. There were, I was mesmerized by the girls in fashion. So most of the things I did early on were centered around fashion, fashion commercials, fashion products. And I just loved traveling around the world with the best looking women alive.
Where did you used to go, traveling around the world?
Oh, one year we had a kind of an endless summer. It was a year in which I shot literally 300 days. 300 shooting days. That's more than you do on a film. And it seemed every other day we were in a different country. We had an endless summer. We followed the summer. We began in the wintertime and went to Brazil. That was the first stop. I believe it was Rio. We were Rio, Sao Paulo. And because it was the middle of summer and we were doing summer fashions, and so we followed the sun that year. And there was a film out at that time called Endless Summer. It was about surfing. And we were having an endless summer of girls.
So before and working in commercials, doing painting, and I believe you studied architecture. Is that correct?
Mm.
You then wrote two screenplays, or you contribute. Actually, I'm not entirely sure what your contribution was. Did you completely write Silent Running and Magnum Force, or did you rewrite Silent Running and Magnum Force?
No, Silent Running was a project I was in New York, and I had no idea of how to write. I had no idea I was in the process of learning how to direct because I never went to film school. So I don't know anything of that kind of experience that kids have today. I have no idea of it. People like Scorsese went to film schools. And the film school influence can be seen, I think, in certain people's film. But I never had that luxury, and I never had the luxury of studying editing. I had to do everything on my own, so including writing. Writing became a kind of a necessity. The person who actually caused me to write Thunderbolt and Lightfoot is sitting here, my producer of many years and collaborator, Joanne Corelli, who produced Heaven's Gate and Deer Hunter, and was the force behind those movies. We met during the days when I was doing the short period of time I was doing commercials, and she was a very attractive girl running around in a mini skirt in New York, you know, and I thought, wow, this is really a hot number. And we began to date and everything, and then we got to know each other, and somehow I think I mentioned to her, you know, I wanted to do film. I'd like to, after doing commercials for a little bit, it doesn't take much, especially when you shoot 300 days a year, you naturally say, well, you know, I'd like to do something longer than 1 minute, or 30 seconds, or 20 seconds, or we even did things as short as 10 seconds. So she said, Michael, the only way that you are going to, this is quote, I remember all these years, Michael, the only way you will ever get to make a movie is if you write a screenplay and get the biggest star in Hollywood to do it and to agree to let you direct it. And that's it. I said, but Joanne, I don't know how to write. And she said, well, you better learn. And this is the actual dialogue. And I said, but it's impossible. So she convinced me that I had to learn to write. We went to Hollywood, and I shut myself up, and we had a little house, and I took one bedroom and I made it into a kind of office. And I would lock myself in from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. And I didn't know how to type, so it was one finger typing. And then she would hear me laughing. And when she would slip me a grilled cheese sandwich under the door. And that's all I would live on the whole time I worked on this screenplay. And she would say to me when I came out, "What are you laughing about in there every day?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "These characters are making me laugh." And that's how I came to write the first screenplay. And then I wrote it. It was original. It was just my own. And we gave it to Clint Eastwood, who was the biggest star in Hollywood. And he said yes.
Why do you suppose he said yes?
Well, he loved it. He loved it, and he wanted to buy the script. So the agent was deliriously happy. He said, Clint, he read it in 3 days, exactly 3 days. This is no exaggeration. He read it in 3 days. I don't know how long it took me to write it. It wasn't very long. I was working very quickly, thanks to Joanne. In any event, I said, "I don't want to sell it." And she said, and the agent was aghast. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, I want to direct it. He said, "You really want me to tell Clint Eastwood you're not selling him your script?" And I said, "Yes, but I'll sell it only if he lets me direct it." Well, Clint was just, he was laughing so hard when he heard this. He said, "I want to meet this kid who won't sell me his screenplay." So William Morris and Joanne arranged for me to go to Warner Brothers and meet Clint at his office. And I walked in, and he wasn't there yet. And he still has the same office, it hasn't changed. Everywhere is dust. A little old upright piano in the corner with a glass that's probably been there for 30 years with an inch of dust all around it. Very simple. And he's never changed. He's still the same person he was then, now. He's just a wonderful, wonderful guy. And I was waiting for some limousine to show up. Instead, a dirty old Chevy pickup truck, faded green pickup, really horrible green color, pulled up, beat up old Chevy. And out comes Clint, and he had an old T-shirt and jeans and work boots on, and he came in and he had that smile on his face that he has in all the movies you've seen him in. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "So you think you can direct me?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, what makes you think you can direct me?" He was laughing the whole time. And I said, "I don't know, I just do." And he was amused that this kid was saying to the biggest star in Hollywood, he was #1 in the box office for 2 years in a row, was saying, I can direct you. So he said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal." I said, "What's the deal?" He said, I'll buy your screenplay for scale, which is the lowest amount of money you can pay. And I'll let you direct the movie for scale, which is also the lowest amount of money you can pay. And he said, on one condition. I said, "What's the condition?" He said, "If I don't like what you're shooting after 3 days, then you're gone, and I take over and I direct the movie." He said, "Do you agree to that?" I said, "Sure." So he laughed again because he couldn't believe I was making this bet with him. So we went, I met Joanne again. We went to William Morris, who was my agent and his agent at the time. And we told him about the conversation. And my lawyer had come in from New York, and he had no knowledge of movies or anything. And he said, don't do it. Don't make this deal. You're crazy. That's too, you can get millions for the screenplay. And I said, Joanne kept saying, but, it's a chance to work with Clint Eastwood. And he didn't understand the mechanics of movies, the physics of movie production. So we fired him and got a new lawyer, and who's Clint's lawyer still today, Bruce Raymer. And we made the deal, and then we went and we made the movie. And people used to say to him, well, what are you doing? He said, I don't know, I'm making a movie with some 12-year-old kid. And, and when you talk to him, you have to look up because he's so tall. And then it was the best experience I've ever had making a movie. Then and now in the future, I don't anticipate ever again such an experience because I had written the screenplay, it was original. I shot it exactly as I planned it. I did all the scouting and the art directing myself. And I would ask Clint every single night, I said, Clint, are you happy with the footage? And he said, Michael, you just keep putting, quote, and he was a producer. This was the first Malpaso production when he formed Malpaso Productions. And he said, you just keep putting your vision on the screen. He said, you have a unique way of getting scope into a movie. He said, I've worked with so many directors, which he had. He said, and I've worked with the best of them in the most beautiful places in the West. He said, and you would never know where you are. It might have as well have been shot in Burbank on the back lot because they don't know how to put scope on the screen. They don't know how to shoot a mountain. And as John Ford used to speak about that, there's certain distances where you need to be at in order to capture the majesty of a mountain. And there's a certain kind of physics to it all, and it's all in your head. You either have it or you don't have it. Some movies, like for example, Man of La Mancha, the movie musical, was shot all in Spain, but you have no idea you're in Spain. Spain is one of the most beautiful countries in the world, but when you look at that movie, you have no idea. It might as well have been shot in the back lot in Hollywood. And that's what Clint was referring to. He said, somehow you have this ability to get, the place on the screen. And I don't know where that comes from, perhaps from my background in architecture. I don't know. And he didn't change one shot. He didn't change one line. He didn't change one single thing. Even on the editing, he didn't change a single cut. And that never happened after that. And Joanne said to me at one point, she said, Michael, you better remember this experience very well because it will never happen again. It will never be as good as this. And boy, was she right.
But what came next wasn't too bad, though, was it?
Oh, it was a nightmare. I mean, the film happily turned out well, but the actual making of it and the people that one was forced to work with was an absolute nightmare. I mean, it was so difficult, unnecessarily difficult, and it was a struggle from beginning to end. From one end to the other was filled with problems. It was nothing like working with Clint. Working with Clint was a very special experience, and one of the great things about him as a producer, and I'm sure now as a director, is that he always trusted new people. He was always willing to try a young cameraman, a young person like myself who didn't know anything. I mean, I had no idea how to shoot a movie, let alone put one together. But he had a sense. And he has a sense of, it's some innate thing he has within himself. And nobody in Hollywood is like him. I think he's unique. And I feel very blessed, truly, I mean this from my heart, that I was able to do my first film with and for Clint Eastwood's company because he was the producer and I was the writer-director. And it was the first Academy Award nomination that his company was ever involved with. Jeff Bridges, of course, was nominated for Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. And ironically, his competition that year was Godfather 2. His competition was De Niro. And because Coppola had made many, many movies before I ever made, my first movie, he was a big, established, famous director. And Clint was so thrilled that his company got an Academy Award nomination that he took out ads, and it was he was very excited by it. And of course, I didn't know what it meant yet. So I remember sitting in the Academy Award Theater, which was the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion then with Joanna, and I didn't understand the importance of it yet. And even when I got one, and I was lucky to get one, as I said, to work with Clint Eastwood, and then to actually be handed an Academy Award by John Wayne in his last public appearance, because as you know, after that night, he died of cancer, lung cancer. Both of them were so tall. I mean, it was hard for me to talk to them, but they were both so gracious. And John Wayne had been my hero because of my great love for John Ford movies. And I was speechless that night. I was so speechless, I didn't know what to say. So, and the next day I had to go to work shooting Heaven's Gate. So literally the next morning, a private jet took me to Montana. And the next day I was filming. I was on the set. So there was no time to enjoy it, so I had no idea of what it meant or nothing. To this day, I don't know what the experience is really like. It was so rushed.
When did the Deer Hunter, sorry to interrupt, when did the Deer Hunter come up as an idea, what was the origins, the genesis of it?
I don't remember exactly. Some company, well, it wasn't an American company that funded it. It was a British company. It was EMI. The great music giant, and they decided that they wanted to get into the movie business, and they had allocated a certain portion of their revenues toward movie making, but they had to spend it for some tax reasons, accounting reasons in England, by a certain date. So they were committed to making 3 movies. One was a movie by Sam Peckinpah, and one was a movie with Ryan O'Neal and Bruce Dern. I've forgotten who the director was on that. And then, for some reason, myself. And they were really counting on the Peckinpah movie to be the star movie, and the others were just a way to spend tax money. And then things turned out as they did. Happily for me, unhappily for the others. But it was, they had some ideas that they were turning over in their head, and they gave me some preliminary things that some people had written, which were just absolutely awful. I went back and I said to Joanne, I can't work with this. This is ridiculous. They have ridiculous ideas. The people behind it don't know what they're doing. They had 2 producers who still don't know what they're doing, and but are still in the business because of Deer Hunter. But they don't know any more now than they did then, and then they knew nothing. She said, "Well, will they give you money to make a movie?" I said, "Yes. They want to start." Like immediately. So she said, well, then just make up a story of your own, tell them you'll do it, but do your own story. So I said, that's crazy. She said, no, just go in and tell them a story, and and film your own version of whatever it is they have in their mind. So I did that. I went and I told them a story. I told them the Deer Hunter story. And at the end of it was 1 hour in Beverly Hills in an office on Rodeo Drive. And I told them the story. And they said, okay, go make the movie. It wasn't even written. It was just an idea I had in my head, so I had to prepare it and write it at the same time. It was a lunatic, but once again, I took Joanne's advice. Her advice on Thunderbolt and Lightfoot was right. You're never going to get a movie to direct unless you write it yourself and get a big star to do it. And here she was right again by saying, just take their money and make your own movie. So I did.
For you, was it a film about the Vietnam experience, or was it about guys in a community?
No, it's not about Vietnam at all. I mean, of course, Vietnam is very much a part of it, but it's nothing like Apocalypse. Apocalypse is a movie about Vietnam, centered in Vietnam, about whatever Coppola perceived. I don't think he was in the army at all himself, but it was his fantasy of Vietnam. No, this is a story of people, of mates, who are all kind of, in a way, social outcasts in a small town, but form a kind of a nuclear family of their own. And as people who are outcasts generally do, people on the outside. And it's a story of what happens to this family when traumatic events take place in their life, how it affects them, how it affects their relationships, how it affects them as individuals, how it affects them as a group, family. And Vietnam happened to be, because it was so much in the news at the time, the traumatic event. But it's really a story, a very simple story about how ordinary people deal with tragedy, trauma, upheaval, great tragedy in their personal life, how they can survive it, how they're wounded by it, how they deal with it, and survive it with an abiding love for their country at the same time, which is the ending. The ending is really not meant to be so much a statement of patriotism, but a statement of communion. When people are in trouble, as they are, when they're very troubled and sick inside, spiritually very sick, they need some time to do something together. In this case, it's make a sound. And they sing that song because it's a song that every American child knows by heart, because you taught it in school. Everybody knows the words of God Bless America. And so it's a communal sound. And they begin to sing the one song they all know from grade school on, and you never forget those words as long as you live. And so they sing the one song they happen to know, happens to be God Bless America, and it reunites them as a family. It becomes a family communion. Instead of a Last Supper, it becomes a first breakfast, if you will, of a new family. It is breakfast that they're eating. It's not the Last Supper. It's the first breakfast.
What kind of director are you when you were on the set, when you got those actors, the crew, the cameras? Are you pumped up? Are you tranquil? Are you a tyrant? Are you a humble man? How does it work?
I think I'm probably not so different than Visconti or Ford. You're not... You're very concerned about details. You're very concerned about every aspect of the production being right. You want everybody to do their job well. You want the grips to be superlative. You want the electricians, the sound. You want everybody to be their best. And of course, you want your actors to be at their best, and you want to give them every support that you can give them in order to elevate their performance as high as, to get them to go beyond their limit or what they perceive their limits to be, to get them to act in a way they've not acted before, ever. And that is one advantage of having written the screenplay, is you know it, you know all the dialogue by heart. And so you don't have to keep saying to the script girl, let me see that scene. You know the scene, and you know every word, and you know what you meant by it, and you know what the underlying, you know, the subtext of every scene. And you're immediately at home with your actors, and you know how to deal with their fears. For example, I think when I have a suspicion that when Visconti worked with Callas, Maria Callas, because as you know, he directed many operas as well as all of the great movies. I mean, his achievement will never be matched, and that's why I think he's so very special. But I'm sure that from the first time he worked with Callas, her acting on stage began to change. I mean, granted, she was a fantastic singer with this incredible range and power in her voice, and was a driven performer to do the best that she could. But I think she learned from Luchino Visconti that no gesture on stage or walk or any movement on stage should be empty. One shouldn't walk about on the stage just to walk about on the stage instead of just standing there and singing. That every gesture had a meaning, and the meaning always had to revert back to the story, the libretto of the opera. What are you singing at this point? What are you feeling at this point? If you just, it's the same is true with ballet dancers. Choreographers constantly have to remind them, you know, when you reach out your arm in a certain way, you know, you're not just making a graceful gesture with your arm. You're, you know, you're reaching out to this baby that you long to touch again. It becomes a different gesture. The gesture becomes full. Even when you don't realize why, it's a better gesture. And I think from him, she came to understand that every movement on stage, there was a reason. And critics took note of how she moved across the stage so well with Luchino Visconti's, under Luchino's direction. And her gestures were full, and that's because I think nobody was better with actors. And I think that her work was probably immeasurably improved by his contact with her. Because before Luchino was in opera, you know, the directors were unknown people. The conductor was everything. And there were no star directors. I think maybe there were a couple of names bubbling up. We're talking about in the 40s and the 50s, you know, or so. And the era right after World War II and during World War II. And I think that because of him, partly because of his work, that directors of opera, Franco Zeffirelli, production of blah, 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 you know, that the directors became an important part of opera, and rightly so. Zeffirelli's film version of Romeo and Juliet was a huge success because he understood the very simple truth of the situation. Romeo and Juliet had been done in Hollywood, and I'm sure in England, everywhere, for ages. And it was, you know, it was always very stuffy, played by 45-year-old actors, you know, and you have some 45-year-old in a tights saying, you know, Romeo, Romeo, you know, where art thou, Romeo? It's ridiculous. I mean, Zeffirelli put it to the two actors very simply. He said, every time you see each other, and every moment that you're talking, every time you just lay eyes on each other, all you want to do is fuck. Because they're 14, they're 15, what else do they want to do? And it worked. It worked. It was brilliant. Because first of all, there were people of the right age playing the parts as they were intended, as it was written. And of course, all the older people made sense because they were all a bunch of old farts, as they should have been. And it was the opposite of everything that had come before. And so for the first time, Americans got to really understand. For the first time, they understood Romeo and Juliet and the tragedy. And it's a tragedy of youth, not a tragedy of two 50-year-olds in tights, professing their love, playing just the poetry. They were playing the inner truth of what Shakespeare wrote. And so it was a huge, huge hit in America. For the only time that I know of where Shakespeare was such an overwhelming public hit. And it's only because people understood the intention of the actors. And I think that all Luchino tried to do was, with Callas, was the same thing, was pay attention to the character.
I have time really for one last question, which is, there's 3 decades you've been working in the business one way or the other. What do you feel you've learned over the time?
I've tried to learn to keep my mouth shut as much as possible. I've tried to learn not to speak so much. And so these interviews are very difficult for me. I've tried to learn to be quiet, silent. But
you love cinema, don't you?
Oh yes, I wouldn't do it if I didn't. I wouldn't do anything if I didn't. I wouldn't write if I didn't. I wouldn't do a thing if I didn't. As my mother once said to me ages ago, she said, Michael, you're either going to work yourself to death, die while you're working, or you're going to be a bum. Complete bum, beach bum, which is absolutely true. I will either work too much or I will be a surfer bum on a beach someplace.
Well, some people would say that's not such a bad way to end up.
No, it isn't. It isn't. Picture of margaritas on a beach, California beach, and a surfboard, and some music, and sun shining.
Okay, I've really got to end because you've got another one upstairs.
Are you sure?
I'm told so.
Now, you can exhibit a great act of courage here by keeping going, and then see what happens.
Great acts of courage.
What? No, it's up to you now. So you're in control. You can say.
You think I'm in control?
Yeah, you can say, Michael, we're going to keep going, and to hell with everything else. We'll see what happens when they come running down, storming.
Do you want to do that?
The set? No, you have to. I don't want to. I'm here.
All right, I'll ask,
you're calling the shots, not me.
Encouraged by you, I'm going to ask you consider yourself an European or an American film director?
I'm American.
Yeah, but
what else am I? What else?
Do you share the Hollywood sensibility, or do you lean towards Europe?
I don't know what the Hollywood sensibility is.
Fulfilling a market requirement. Everything you do is some way directed by people and forces beyond yourself, where the European element would be, it's your vision.
Well, I just told you the story of Thunderbolt and Lightfoot exactly as it happened, perfectly true, where I was somehow fortunate enough on the very first effort to do exactly what I wanted with a major studio, with a major star in the Hollywood system. So maybe I was part of that system. I don't know. All I know is I worked with a person who was powerful enough to get the movie made and to say, make it the way you want to make it. So perhaps I'm not a good subject for that particular question. And probably not. I mean, there are probably people who are bitter about their experiences in Hollywood. I don't carry bitterness. I mean, there are very unpleasant things that have happened to me, quite bloody things, I might add. But I'm not bitter about anything that's happened. I've been blessed in my life with, working with wonderful people. I've had the opportunity to work with great writers like Gore Vidal and I've been all over the world. There are people that I love very much. And perhaps I'm not the best subject for that question, you know. The guy who would have been perfect for that question is John Cassavetes. Someone asked me in an interview I did for this trip, before I came here, we did it by phone. The question to me was, it was from Panorama, whether or not I was the last Hollywood rebel. And I laughed. I said, the true last Hollywood rebel was John Cassavetes, because he, nobody fought the system as hard as he did. And he was fortunate in that his wife was a very beautiful, very great actress. And so she was always, you know, his leading lady. And he would have been great to ask that question, because he had, he just said, screw it all, I'm going to do it my way. And, you know, he...
And you never said that?
Joanne, did I ever say that? No, I never said that.
Michael Cimino? Here we end before I get dragged out the door.
I would love to see that. You know, we could film it. The guys could come here. We could shoot over the shoulder, shoot you being dragged away by the police.
Well, I'm up for it. If you're up for it, I'll take direction.
We probably missed all of your questions.
We did, but yeah.
I'm sorry.
Reality.